Namaste, a warm welcome and deep gratitude to each and everyone who's joining us today on Luminous Perspectives. And always deep bows for the supportive and gracious folks at SEC TV for making this all possible, to Matt Wildman for his technical support, and a special shout out to his son, Oli, who is here bringing us extra special energy today. So, to begin, I'd like to settle in. This is going to be a half hour together, and I'd like you to make it yours. This is your time. We have no place to go and nothing to do, just to be here for these moments together. And I'd like to start out, well, first of all, sit, get comfortable wherever you are, in a seat, on a couch, on the floor. Just feel yourself getting comfortable in your own body. You might relax, release any tension you might be feeling. I tend to hold it in my shoulders, so I have to be aware and lower my shoulders a little bit. So I'd like to start out with an exercise that was actually introduced not that long ago by the Heart Math Institute. If you haven't heard of them, they're well worth looking up online. They have been in service since 1991, researching the heart and the way the heart communicates with the rest of the body. They're one of the folks who realized first that the heart sends actually 80% of our whole body's communication up, and our brain is sending 20% of our whole body's communication down. So when they say pay attention to your heart, it's good advice. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today. And part of this exercise is getting more in touch with our hearts. So just for a moment, I invite you to go into your imagination. We all have a wonderful imagination. Just go into your imagination for a moment and picture, if you will, the goodness and the light that resides in you. It may be a little difficult to get in touch with it at first, but one way of doing that is get in your mind's eye, in your thought, something you may have done for somebody recently, or maybe during COVID, bringing a meal, offering support, smiling at a stranger even, holding your pet, comforting a pet or a child. And just take that in for a moment. And where did that come from, that goodness, that light vibration that you shared in those moments? And how do you think that might have affected the person you were offering that to? Just feel that for a moment. Good job. And the next piece of the exercise is we're going to take a deep breath in. We're actually going to bring it right into our hearts, and then we're going to release it. And you can do this at your comfort level. But what we want to do is bring it in, allow it to surround our hearts, and then exhale. You can exhale some of the goodness from your heart, send it out to the world, however that works for you. So let's again take a moment, settle ourselves, and take a nice deep breath in and imagine it going right to your heart. So all that goodness and light in your heart. and exhale it, allowing that light and goodness, if you will, to be shared with the rest of the world. And one more time. Take a deep breath in. You can even add a color to it. Let it go to your heart. See if you can feel that in your heart, surrounding your heart, comforting your heart. And exhale. You may have already exhaled. I talk a lot. Whew. So just know that physiologically, when we take a deep breath in like that, even if we don't pay attention to a heart or a certain part of our bodies, it's automatically sending a signal to your nervous system to relax. It's safe to relax. That's the message it's sending. So our breath is with us 24/7. And in some future sessions, we're going to learn how to work with it a little bit more. But I don't even like the word work with it because it's there. It's doing its thing automatically. But we can learn different practices that really help calm our nervous systems and put a little more focus on our hearts. So I'm going to pay attention for 1 second to my notes. And you might take a moment just to see if you could feel any difference or a shift as you did that, got in touch with your kindness. So now I'd like to invite all of us to open up the piece of us that's very curious, like we had as a child. Just, I don't know what's going to happen here, but let me be curious and maybe open to exploring some new ideas, some new perspectives, or practices, or even renewing a practice that was helping and supportive to you in some way that served you in the past. And as always, I encourage each of us to follow your intuition. If it feels good, use it, do it, be with it. If it doesn't, let it go. Very simple, no judgment, just use your intuition on any of these exercises. So in our last session, we talked about resilience. That also sits in our core and gets us through really tough times, helps us bounce back. We talked a bit about how to strengthen that resilience, that core, and also ways of keeping from depleting it. It's very easy if we overdo caregiving or if we aren't aware of how our body is feeling, our emotions. We might overreact or so it's just a way of keeping in touch, something I have to learn more each day, keeping in touch. And where am I at today? Do I need a rest? Do I need to take a break? Do I need to take some deep breaths? So one of the biggest support systems for our resilience is actually self-compassion. And we're going to be focusing on that today. It's actually, self-compassion is actually a key element in our resilience. And it's actually, it's kindness, it's self-acceptance. They're all foundations in the practice of self-compassion. But what does it offer us? You'll find out in the practice as you start doing it, or you may already have been doing it, but it really starts to offer us a sense of inner balance. I don't have to overreact. I don't have to get wound up in a situation. I can hold myself, even put my hand on my heart and say, I'm here for you if something is really overwhelming. And it gives us inner balance, brings us back to our sense of wholeness, of that piece of inner goodness that we sometimes forget. And it's just it's wonderful for our overall well-being, sense of well-being. So I'd like to go now to just a huge gratitude and deep bow to Dr. Kristen Neff, who's written the most comprehensive books and guides on self-compassion. She's actually considered one of the major pioneers in the field. She's been studying it and researching it for over 20 years. One of her books, the Compassion Workbook, which I have in my briefcase and wanted to show you, but I will maybe before the end, but it was co-authored by her colleague Chris Germer, and together they've written a guide. It's about that thick and very easy to go through, even to open it and say, what do I need to learn today, and go to that piece. But they have really described in wonderful detail with personal experiences and studies to back it up what self-compassion is, how to develop it, how to use it in our lives. It's what it's not. Self-compassion is not self-pity. It's the opposite. It's a strength we can draw on to, as I said, to get to that inner sense of balance, strength, and fortitude, and self-forgiveness when you feel it's needed. So these are wonderful, wonderful reads, and I use them as go-tos, I would say weekly, if not daily. And again, Kristen Neff, Chris Germer and Kristen Neff are the real deal. They're authentic. They talk about their own self-flaws, how they've worked through them, how they're still working through them. So it's not, these are the talking head experts. Yes, they are experts, but they're also talking about their very human side. So let me segue for just a moment into how I can share a piece of my personal introduction to self-compassion. It was actually when I was in my 30s, sitting in a small loft-type office space, a client of a very experienced, intuitive, and kind therapist. I'll call him Dr. L. And I was working on a really heavy-duty family situation and feeling lost. At one point, probably a month into our work, Dr. L said to me, "Sky, you think your feelings, you don't feel them." I was furious. I thought, he has no idea who I am. And I said to him, very angrily, I might add, "I'm one of the most feeling people you'll ever meet." He was very quiet and a very kind and quiet voice. He said to me, "Yes, for everyone else." So I don't need to say any more. That was my beginning. I actually, at the time, I had no idea what he meant for everyone else and not me. But I trusted him, and I began a lifelong, daily journey of self-discovering, self-honoring. It wasn't called self-compassion then. And a new awareness of ways to feel and express those feelings. And I'm going to add, I'm learning that and deepening that every day. And do I forget? You bet I do. Do I go down a rabbit hole? You bet I do. And again, that's our human nature. And we're going to speak to that a little bit later, but we all, every one of us in every part of the world, have the same feelings, reactions. Sometimes we think, it's just me, am I crazy, am I overdoing it? But we all feel loss, we all feel despair. We all feel I screwed up. We feel joy, we feel sorrow. It's the whole Megillah, as Dr. Wayne Dyer used to say. But when we humanize it, and I'm stepping ahead of myself a little bit, but it seems to fit. when we humanize it and we say, we're all flawed. We didn't come in with this perfect self. So the big part of self-compassion is saying, can I accept my faults? Can I work with them? Can I allow the wholeness of me to be accepted? And Tara Brach has written a wonderful book that I'll also recommend right now, off script, and it's called Radical Acceptance. It's a big helping piece to this whole picture. So, how does Dr. Neff actually define self-compassion? She writes, self-compassion emerges from the heart of mindfulness, another word for deep awareness. When we meet our suffering in our lives, not avoiding or running from it, she says, together, mindfulness and self-compassion form a state of warm-hearted, connected presence during difficult moments in our lives. It's a practice in which we learn to be a good friend to ourselves when we need it most. After all, when we go to a good friend and we share something that's hurting or complicated in our lives, the friend doesn't say, get over it, you should know better. Why didn't you learn that when you were 15 years old? And I'm kind of laughing at that, but that's the way we can respond to ourselves. I know that happens with me every now and then. You idiot, how did you do that? And what I want to point out is that part of self-compassion is actually listening to ourselves. What words am I using right now? Am I using comforting words, or am I using words that are really tearing me down? And the science of the vibration of words even, and the physiological change that happens in our bodies with different words. The words idiot, when I say them to myself or somebody else says them to me, are going to resonate in my body and send out a chemical reaction, actually. And we'll talk about that in another session. But it's well worth noting that when we're kind to ourselves, we are actually sending a chemical bath of oxytocin and other good, loving hormones that are going to help us get through a situation versus put us in a freeze or, I can't do this. So there's a universal truth that Dr. Neff also discusses as, why is it easier to do for someone else, to be there for someone else in their struggles than it is for us to be there for ourselves. And for example, she says if one grows up in an environment where one has not been listened to, our emotions are not accepted, we learn to block them or suppress them in order to feel accepted or to please a caretaker in order to belong. That can lead to low self-worth and actually an ingrained feeling of ourselves disconnecting from our own emotions, something that I did as a young woman and in my example. So one important takeaway, the good news is that ingrained patterns can be unlearned. There's a whole science of neuroplasticity, which we're going to do in our next session, that confirms that we can work with our neuronal makeup. We can actually rewire our brains with certain exercises and practices to really get more positivity and more resourcefulness instead of going to that old negative default that we often go to. So you don't have to go it alone. There's excellent resources, seminars, podcasts by world-renowned researchers and doctors, psychologists like Gabor Mate and Bessel van der Kolk, two of my favorites, some well-regarded, time-tested support groups, and of course, a well-recommended private counselor or therapist. Dr. Neff also strongly points out that if you have had abuse or serious traumas, big T traumas, even little t traumas that have mounted up, it's really important not to try to do this work by yourself, but to find the support of a good guide or therapist. So the major components of self-compassion, first are kindness. We've talked about that. Our default to go to the harsh inner critic, which we talked about. So if we feel inadequate or not good enough in any situation, we have the should-haves. I could have done better, I should have done better. All of those messages that are really not helpful, we can instead be encouraging and supportive, offering ourselves acceptance like a very good friend would. We have the choice what response we're going to do, and that takes practice. I still have to practice it. Am I going off and creating a situation I'm going to have to clean up afterwards? Or can I take that deep breath and give myself some space and say, how do I want to respond? How do I want to be there for myself? So the second is what she calls common humanity, and we touched on that, is knowing that our emotions are not bad. There's no judgment on any emotion because all of us, every human being, has them. We share that. We saw that in spades during the pandemic, where we saw other people's pain, going through the same thing that we were going through, losing someone we cared about, losing opportunities, finances, whatever it was, and the joys that we shared when we helped one another, that place of kindness that we forget we have. And when we have mindfulness for ourselves and self-compassion, it's also been shown in studies that that actually makes us more available to be mindful and compassionate in understanding what somebody else is going through. So we've talked about mindfulness. She says you should actually put that first, because if we don't have the awareness, we can't possibly affect a change or a transformation, which is really what all of this good stuff does. It affects a transformation. There's a shift in us that happens. It may be a shift you don't feel at first, but it's a shift. And I'm getting a 5-minute alert, so we're going to go and kind of go to the next piece, which is, I just also want to say that these practices of breathing, you can even put your hand on your heart and say, even though I'm having a really rough time, I deeply honor my feelings, and I'm here for myself. It's a practice in having your own back and knowing that even though you might feel very alone, you really aren't, okay? We've talked about support systems. We've talked about inner resilience and building that. So these are all things that we want to just keep in our hearts, in our brains, and that beautiful heart-brain connection. So in closing, I hope that this overview of self-compassion and its many benefits to really every aspect of our lives, and the effects when we practice it the beneficial effects on our loved ones and friends and pets and everybody we care about. So I hope that it can give you a little bit of a practical application, maybe trying some of the applications for your own lives. I look forward to our next session and delving into the very good and awe-inspiring news coming from renowned neuroscientists and researchers about neuroplasticity and polyvagal theory, all things that are going to be so supportive of our emotional regulation and ways we actually experience more happiness and expansiveness in the world. I'd like to close with this short poem from Bianca Sparacchio. Happiness turned to me and said, "It is time. It is time to forgive yourself for all the things you did not become. It is time to exonerate yourself for all the people you couldn't save, for all the fragile hearts you fumbled with in the dark with your confusion. It is time, child, to accept that you do not have to be who you were a year ago, that you do not have to want the same things. Above all, it is time to believe with reckless abandon that you are worthy of me, for I have been waiting for you for years." So again, let me thank everybody for joining us. It is such a deep honor to be here with you. And it's always, when I do my research to put on these shows, it's always a wonderful reminder to me of what I still have to learn. And the intention that I always bring to this show is just offering some resources. I don't consider myself a talking head by any means, is to offer some resources and some support. So I send us all off today with deep love and honoring, and I look forward to our next show together. Thank you so kindly.